Liquid Snake. Where do we even begin with this character? Liquid Snake is an iconic character, if not the iconic character. In a series full of bisexual vampires, mind-controlling arms, and photosynthetic nudists, Liquid stands out on top for his outlandish statements, voice, and theatrics. But what is Liquid's deal? Considering he's Solid Snake's twin brother, why does he stand out so much? How much do genes really play a part in a person's personality and quality of life? Is it the ultimate determinant? We may not have all the answers for that, but let's dive into Liquid's understanding of it all. Liquid, as he won't let you forget, is a product of Les Enfants Terribles and was born in 1972. Under Zero, Dr. Clark and her team aim to create the ultimate soldiers by cloning their old friend and the greatest soldier of all time, Big Boss. Liquid, Solid, and Solidus were the result of these experiments. Solidus being a perfect clone, while Solid and Liquid both inherited altered genes. The project ended when Liquid was 4 years old. We can infer that he was under the protection and supervision of Zero, Dr. Clark, and the team. In Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, we learn that Liquid was in England and traveled to Africa in Zero's care and escaped. He was 11 or 12 in The Phantom Pain, which meant he spent the majority of his young childhood with Zero or Zero's team, and then survived on his own. He winds up feuding with Venom and becoming the head Rugrat during The Phantom Pain. It's no surprise that Liquid is talented. Combined with the genes of his father, his time spent with Zero, Dr. Clark, and Venom Snake would only add to his scrappiness. Prior to his fight with Solid, he's a decorated soldier as well. We see that he has strong leadership skills, as he is the head of Foxhound during Metal Gear Solid. It's honestly astonishing that Liquid had accomplished so much in spite of his upbringing. At face value, we have a competent and established soldier who can command a squad successfully. He's barely in his 30s and he's already experienced war, piloted a giant mech, and survived being around other adults with questionable motives. We want to put a great emphasis on his physical prowess, as it really shows the success of the Les Enfants Terribles project. Liquid, for all intents and purposes, was a fantastic soldier, and it's all thanks to his father's genes. So what happened? Why did he meet his demise so early? Liquid is a man whose limitations are entirely self-imposed. Let's focus on what we said when we started this video. Nature versus nurture. By nature, Liquid's genes are proven to be powerful and appropriate for his intended role. Liquid's purpose was to test different variations of Big Boss's genes. In their goal to create the perfect soldier, Dr. Clark and her team made a few variations, and we can imagine that this was to test what genes would result with the best outcome. Liquid had access to the best training, from his days in the British Special Air Service to perhaps even his earlier days while he was in Outer Heaven. What's not spoken about, however, is his upbringing, his parenting, his actual emotional care. If you're familiar with our channel, you know we like to dive into the emotional and sometimes psychological development of characters in this series. It's not hard to. For Liquid, we want to first start off with Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. Erik Erikson was a psychoanalyst known for his theories of psychological development. Erikson believed that individuals needed to progress through each stage successfully in order to live a fulfilling life. If an individual were to fail to complete a stage, it might prevent them from progressing to the next stage and thus begin to show up in their personality and sense of self. Self-conscious behaviors would begin to show.
That's why you're so obsessed with Big Boss. Some warped kind of love.
Love? It's hate! He always told me I was inferior, and now I'll have my revenge! You should understand me, brother. You killed our father with your own hands! You stole my chance for revenge! Now I'll finish the work that father began. I will surpass him! I will destroy him!
For the first few years, Liquid was under the care of Zero and Dr. Clark. As part of the Les Enfants Terribles project, we could imagine he was cared for by the team. While his basic needs were probably met, considering the kind of project that this was, it's unconfirmed if affection was part of that equation. All humans need nourishment, both in food and affection. Passing the infancy stage means allowing himself to trust in those who cared for him. This trust for his caretakers allowed him to trust as an adult, the ability to lean on those around him, further proven by his career as a soldier and leader of Foxhound. The early childhood and play age occurs between the ages of 1 and 6 years old. Liquid is still under the care of Zero. We can hypothesize that Liquid was successful in passing these stages. The next stage is industry versus inferiority. We believe Liquid failed this stage. He, until his death, remained stuck. He ran away from Zero at the age of 7, and he encountered Venom and the boys at around age 11. This is the prime time frame for this developmental stage. There's many questions to be asked, but there's one that rises above. Why did he run away? For someone who was cared for his entire life, what could have led him to run away? Liquid holds the impression that he is inferior. His whole life has been an attempt to prove that incorrect, to prove that he is the superior twin clone. Liquid meets Solid and declares that he plans to best his brother, prove his superiority, and then fight the Patriots. Liquid claims in the English version of Metal Gear Solid 1 that he received all the recessive and inferior genes. His claim is that by being the twin with the recessive genes, he is the weaker of the two. But I'm sorry, Liquid. That's not how genes work. Traits are passed onto offspring through genes. Within a gene, there are 2 alleles, one inherited from each parent. The alleles within a gene interact, and one of them is considered dominant and expressed in the offspring, while the other is considered recessive and is overruled. Dominant and recessive are not synonyms for superior and inferior. Why would Liquid state that then? We recruited our friend, Luca, in order to understand the language and kanji Liquid uses to describe his own genetic makeup. Along with her expertise as a doctor, we asked her to watch the Japanese version of the very cutscene in which Liquid explains that he's the inferior twin. We wanted to get an understanding of what was said there to see if either of these hypotheses is true. 1. It was a translation issue. 2. Kojima was incorrect regarding superior, inferior versus dominant, recessive. 3. Liquid is just stupid.
そうとも。だがただの双子ではない。遺伝子に呪いを込められた双子。レス・エンファントス・テレブレス。貴様はいい。親父の優性遺伝子を全てもらった。俺は劣勢遺伝子ばかりを受け継いだ。全ては貴様という優性種を作り出すための仕掛けだ。俺という存在はお前の想像のためにだけあった。俺が優勢だと。そうだ。俺はその絞りかすだ。貴様にわかるか。生まれ落ちた時からクズとみなされ続けてきた惨めさが。だが親父は俺を選んだ。
In the Japanese cutscene, Liquid is stating that numerous inferior, recessive versions of Snake were sacrificed to produce the superior, dominant Snake. When Liquid discusses this, he's purposely discussing his genetics as inferior and solids as superior. The way it's worded by Liquid makes it sound like recessive genes were genetic mistakes. Our friend expressed that she wondered if Kojima misunderstood dominant versus recessive. In the Japanese version of the cutscene, Liquid starts off by saying, "I'm the genetically cursed twin. You have it good," he says. "You got father's dominant genes, while I inherited all of his recessive genes." In the Japanese cutscene, he's also stating the nature of his genes as inferior versus superior. This is similar to what is said in the English cutscene. It looks like the translation issue wasn't the case, so let's move on to the next hypothesis. Our friend herself hypothesized that Kojima didn't understand how genes worked. We were under that assumption as well. From our research, and in conjunction with Luca, we were able to find articles discussing this false connotation of dominant equals superior and recessive equals inferior in terms of genes. Textbooks, as recently as 2021, have been updated to use kanji that better reflects the way alleles work, while also taking out the positive and negative connotations. So, is Kojima wrong? No, Kojima isn't wrong. Language is. Okay, but for real, while this is a possible explanation, we don't think that this was the issue in the game. We believe the third hypothesis, that Liquid was not just stupid, but he was deliberately fed false information at a young age to further the nature versus nurture premise. Kids are smart, but comprehension in early stages is not that strong. Children are desiring warmth, food, and comfort. As they get older and begin developing, especially if we look at Erikson's developmental stages again, they begin to look at themselves in comparison to the world and those around them. Why would Liquid run away at the school-age time? The conflict of industry versus inferiority, where one should be developing self-confidence. We believe that Liquid's sense of inferiority began due to Dr. Clark and her team instilling in Liquid that he had recessive inferior genes. In English, we could excuse and explain away that recessive does not mean inferior. However, the kanji for dominant and recessive explicitly also means superior and inferior, respectively. To a young child, to tell him he holds recessive genes is to tell him that he is inferior. Having his caretakers so callously describe him that way made a young Liquid angry and furious, bent on proving them and himself wrong. Everything Liquid did was in direct contrast to that notion of being inferior. After running away from Dr. Clark and Zero, did Liquid encounter anyone that would be able to adequately explain genes to him? You think Outer Heaven had an adequate biology class? Do you think anyone there was even qualified to teach? Well, we do have one guy. You know, Huey wasn't teaching those kids anything. Huey took one look at those kids and said, "Get your ass in Sahelanthropus now." Liquid is definitely the kind of guy to say something like, "Love is just a chemical in your brain. You're not really in love. Your genes can't pass love on." Liquid's own limitations lie in his own belief that he wasn't good enough. Liquid's story is tragic in that way. Liquid was accomplished, powerful, and a recipient of DNA that made him a great soldier. His mental and emotional health, however, forever kept his full potential at bay, and he died in a vain attempt at proving, for once, that he was better. The sad irony is that Liquid was the recipient of the dominant genes all along. Dr. Clark, in her genius, implanted the death blow by planting the seed in an impressionable little Liquid's mind that he was weak, inferior, and lesser. Perhaps it was an attempt to have Liquid push beyond his limits, thus being the super soldier that the Les Infanteries project envisioned. In many ways, Dr. Clark succeeded. However, stuck in that industry versus inferiority phase, Liquid was unable to develop an identity of his own. His identity was that of proving his own self-worth. Everyone, let's pour one out for Liquid. A murderer and villain, but at the end of the day, another character who might have benefited from therapy.